Chapter 351. Before leaving, he inadvertently uttered a remark, and then Zeus saw the indifferent gaze of the girl in the blue dress. He involuntarily set aside his ulterior motives and transformed into lightning to fly back into the sky. The girl was not as easy to handle as his powerless sister Demeter, so the divine king did not ponder it any. With departures and returns, the day and night had alternated more than once. This brief period had nothing special about it. The world still seemed peaceful and harmonious, aside from the comings and goings of the divine king. However, in another part of the earth, a betrayal that had lasted a century was finally drawing to an end. The sun god had descended underground, and the moon still hadn't risen. Nobody knew where the moon goddess who drove the silver chariot had gone recently, but for Moanda this was actually a blessing. No one knew exactly what the sun god and the moon goddess did as they drove their chariots across the sky, nor if they happened to cast their eyes upon the earth. While the likelihood that they would dare peek into Mother Earth's orchard was slim, for the nymphs, slim was still better off as none. Especially today, for according to her previous estimate, today was the day the special fruit would ripen. "Hope all goes well," she murmured. With a silent prayer in her heart, Moanda carefully avoided drawing anyone's attention. On this quiet night, she ventured alone into the golden apple orchard. The sound of the wind carried a tinkling, bell-like noise from afar. It was clear and scattered, chaotic yet touching, like an ancient symphony played by nature or a story of mystical pasts from the dawn of creation. Amidst such harmonies, the nymph passed variety of flora and fruits rarely seen across the 9 realms and stood once again beneath the towering divine tree, looking up at the ancestor of all trees from chaos. It had grown taller and more thriving. Compared to 100 years ago, it was as if it had received some sort of supplement in a brief period, making its presence even more unfathomable than before. Still merely a mortal creature, Moanda was unaware of the secrets behind the changes, only witnessing the external transformation of the divine tree. Mysterious patterns naturally formed on its perfectly proportioned branches, and even the mist settled on each of its leaves, all indicating that the power of the golden apple tree had been enhanced. Although Moanda could notice these changes, she was unaware of the reasons behind them. The nymph did not know that a realm that had once penetrated the 9 realms through the divine tree had merged with chaos, causing the natural forces of the world to gain various degrees of growth. She simply attributed all this to the changes of the era and silently prayed that no unexpected changes would occur. Fortunately, everything thus far had gone smoothly today, and until now, nothing beyond her expectations had occurred. Golden apple, a treasure only the most noble among the gods are worthy of enjoying. Even the king who rules over them must bow before it, she whispered, caressing the trunk with her right hand, her gaze fixed on the only fruit on the tree close to ripeness, or rather, it had now ripened. The fruit stem was nearly detached from the branch, as if a breeze could cause it to fall. Of course, Moanda knew that was impossible. Without a command from Mother Earth, it would hang there perpetually, until Gaia needed it, or someone else plucked it. Shared possession, twin birth. If you do not wish to grow in ignorance and become a mere plaything in Gaia's hands, then please bless me, she said. Her voice was calm, and although she knew the golden apple tree couldn't understand her words, Moanda still spoke to it. What you lack, I will provide. What I lack, you shall fulfill. Eventually, there will be a place for us in this world. Nymphs will not be mere servants at the gods' beck and call. We will establish our own realm, like the cities of humans, the mount of the gods. Without waiting for a response, Moanda lightly pushed off the ground, effortlessly climbing the tree trunk. She felt a surge of invisible force sweep over her body, but ultimately she did not react. This was Mother Earth's legacy. If anyone else were performing this act today, they would instantly trigger the forces Gaia had left on the tree. But now, faced with an insider's betrayal, it proved ineffective. With nimble movements, Moanda touched nothing superfluous and soon reached the golden fruit. It was so beautiful, so radiant, truly a divine fruit not of the mortal realm. Taking a deep breath, the nymph reached out her hand. As she touched the exterior of the golden apple for the second time in her life, feeling its pure life essence, Moanda's heart settled. Without hesitation, she simply plucked it and brought it to her mouth. There were no surprises, no sudden intrusions by outsiders, or anyone else to stop her, and then engage in a struggle vying for righteousness and possession. Moanda thus successfully consumed the forbidden fruit. In a secluded corner of the orchard, near a heath-covered oak, the tree withered and then revived. On the branches of the golden apple tree, the life of the nymph surged and waned. With the fruit ingested, Moanda closed her eyes as if falling asleep, and then tumbled from the canopy. Chapter 352. If there had been others here, they would have easily determined that the daring nymph had died in an instant. Her body had lost its life, leaving only the undecaying shell innate to elves. However, at this moment Moanda's consciousness was otherwise. From life to death, and from death back to life, she felt as if she had relived the process of birth once again. And at a certain moment, the nymph felt she had touched a vast and great consciousness. The gap between them was so immense, like a grain of sand to a mountain, a drop of water to a river. Yet they were also so similar and close, making Moanda feel such peace and beauty. Gradually, their consciousness began to intersect and fuse. Moanda felt herself growing stronger every moment, yet something intangible was being separated out. Stranger fragments of memories began to flood in, some pitch black, others warm and comfortable as if soaked in liquid, and even one interrupted in the process of gestation, planted on a high mountain by a goddess in a green dress. In just a brief moment, Moanda experienced tens of thousands of years since the birth of the golden apple tree. Yet this vast memory brought her no sense of shock, because it was so monotonous and dull, monotonous growth, monotonous fruiting, receiving no more attention than necessary. It lived a long life as still as dead water, stirring not a single ripple. Until this moment, when two real consciousnesses were born from its hazy instincts, everything changed. One was the outsider who brought with it change and hope. The other shared wisdom, yet it was still naive and ignorant, the original entity. This is the authority of a god? Consciousness returned from the vague to the clear. Gradually, Moanda began to feel her own body again, and the new consciousness that was tightly adhered to her. But she couldn't concern herself with it, for with it came a sense of power she had never imagined before. She did not know how strong this surge of divine power was, for the nymph had never before felt the power of the gods. But at this moment, Moanda felt she could move heaven and earth. So this is the authority of a god. Following her instincts, with a single thought, the vegetation in the golden apple orchard revealed its most perfect self under Moanda's command in welcome of their master's rebirth. There was no sense of delay, as smooth as the movement of a natural deity, because she had not stolen the power of the golden apple tree, nor had she ascended to godhood in the guise of the nymph. She had merely made herself a part of it, entering a symbiosis with the existence called Moanda through rebirth, making the golden apple tree uniquely one with her. To be even more precise, the Moanda born of the oak was dead. To any deity in this world now, only one conclusion could be drawn. She was a personality consciousness somehow born from the golden apple tree's breaking of Mother Earth's limitations. Thus the divine tree had become a special elf. Just like the vast difference amongst territorial gods, though also a nymph, the golden apple tree was akin to a god. At this moment, Moanda fully realized that she was no longer her past self. The entire world revealed to her scenes she had not seen before. The trajectory of the law became distinctly visible. When she opened her eyes afresh and reevaluated the golden apple orchard, the power left behind by Gaia appeared no longer mysterious. It was a shackle and a warning, able to prevent any outsider from attempting to steal the treasures here, or to awaken Mother Earth prematurely in the face of irresistible forces. But all these arrangements were not so effective when facing the very fruit tree they were supposed to protect. Of course, even so, it was not easy for Moanda to leave this place. Sigh. Now that I have succeeded, I should leave quickly. Muttering softly, Moanda sensed her acquired authority. Gaia's power still covered this place, so if she wanted to avoid alarming Mother Earth for now, she had to find another way. Soon, the inherent authority of the golden apple tree was more clearly perceived by Moanda. It was born from the seed of all things, the first plant in the world, naturally possessing the authority of plants, the incomplete nature. But that alone was not enough to free Moanda from this entrapment. Because the most important thing was how to contain her new main body. There weren't many things in this world that could allow the golden apple tree to move without harming its vital essence. Fortunately, the seed of all things did not come to this world alone. Life Vase. Now that the golden apple tree has gained consciousness, it is time for you to return to your true master. Gaia, to claim you, obliterated the potential transformation of the divine tree. But now, I am your rightful owner. With a slight tremor of her consciousness, Moanda silently sensed the location of the divine artifact. It shouldn't be far, placed in the Oracle of Delphi instead of Mother Earth to receive offerings, just so long as she… Startled, Moanda sensed that the life vase had not disappeared. However, at this moment, the reborn nymph suddenly discovered that the artifact did not seem to be in the oracle. Within the Temple of Delphi, Moanda only felt the power left there by the gods, but not a hint of the divine artifact's essence. And the current location of the life vase, looking at the empty space before her, and guided by a subtle connection, Moanda suddenly realized that the artifact symbolizing life seemed to be right before her eyes. Have you sensed it already? Well, it is true that you now have more rights than Gaia to wield it. And to think I merely came to borrow Gaia's artifact and I ended up witnessing this. This is truly beyond my expectations. With a faint laugh, the initial disguise dispersed, and Moanda finally saw the figure in front of her and the emerald vase in his hands. Or to be more precise, the figure had never concealed himself. He merely stood there, allowing all things in the world to overlook his presence. Perhaps cautious of Gaia's remaining power, the figure simply stood there quietly. He did not approach further, instead, looked with interest at the grandeur of the golden apple tree before him. Given the day's events, it was an eye-opening experience for him. Now, tell me, what were your plans after leaving here? Chapter 353 Elf and Anchor. The life vase was within reach, but Moanda now had no thoughts about it. If it had been not long ago as an oak nymph, she would have been completely unaware of the terror of the person before her. But now, she could sense the terrible power contained within this figure. Probably not wanting to disturb Gaia, the newcomer was standing just outside the barrier Gaia set for the golden apple tree, as seen by Moanda's eyes. But she could also see that some insidious force had already enveloped the orchard, cutting off any connection between the inside and the outside. Next to the consciousness of Moanda, that hazy thought that had just acquired wisdom curled into a small ball, as if scared by this terrifying presence. However, facing such a situation, the elf was only startled for a moment, then immediately asked calmly, "Are you the one who guided me to take this step? I thought it was the divine king of Mount Olympus before, but now it seems to be someone else." Indeed, for this moment Moanda had anticipated it. That mysterious ancient serpent couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. It must have had its own agenda. Either it was an enemy of Mother Earth, seeking to target Gaia through her existence, or it had other schemes and would surely appear before her when everything was over. Now it seemed to be the latter. Of course, one couldn't rule out the former possibility. Moanda speculated thus, yet under her gaze, the figure before her simply shook its head. "You are overthinking, elf. Perhaps your existence is not as important as you think, and today's events have even less to do with me. This feeling of the cycle of life and death is undoubtedly Lane's doing. He must have been responding to Gaia's creation of life to match the trick I played. And you are just a lucky one who happened to be there." With the life vase of emerald green in hand, Erebus didn't take credit for this. Creating such easily debunked lies was totally pointless. After all, this elf who could betray Mother Earth didn't seem like the type to be grateful. However, looking at the rejuvenated golden apple tree before him, the Lord of Darkness settled one of his doubts. The fundamental reason Gaia was so protective of the orchard but blatantly placed the life vase in the oracle was that when she fell into slumber, The divine artifact that was born with her also became dormant, rendering it meaningless for others to take it. But now it was different. When the life vase changed owners, it also awoke from its dormancy. While this subtle change went unnoticed by most, Erebus, who had been waiting for Gaia's awakening, did not miss it. Yet rushing to Delphi, the Lord of Darkness did not get to see his sister. He had thought it was a sign of Gaia's awakening, but to his surprise, Mother Earth did not awaken, while the golden apple tree did wake up. At this moment, Erebus experienced a deeper epiphany about the world. Perhaps today's discovery was 70% due to his attention over this period, but there might also be a 30% influence of fate. The world itself hoped for the birth of more sentient life, and even without knowing why, the Lord of Darkness, who had yet to open his realm, undoubtedly corroborated from the sidelines that life holds special significance for the world. This made him give it 3 times more consideration. About clearing the remnants of the past before opening a new realm, the Lord of Darkness gradually had a vague idea, but that was not attainable at the moment. It required the right opportunity. But judging by the current state of the world, this opportunity would likely not come in a short time, so before that, Erebus decided to prepare the things he needed to do later in advance. Creating life was one of them. By doing so, when the time he needed came, he would be able to catch up with the progress of others in one step. At least, he couldn't be slower than that youngster hidden in the abyss. Now, answer my question. If I hadn't come, where were you planning to go before? Asking again, the tone of Erebus became slightly more severe. Even though his voice wasn't loud, Moanda could still detect the undeniable determination in it. I was planning to go to Mount Olympus to meet the Divine King. He had been here, and it was on that day that I received this rare opportunity. Without concealing anything, Moanda chose to tell the truth. Before, I always thought he orchestrated all this, and then he locked up the god of meteorology in the abyss, just like with the Titans. So I plan to see if he has the power to stand against Mother Earth. If he does, then I am willing to stay on Mount of the Gods, serving the Divine King as do the other gods. You probably overestimate him. Although Gaia has weakened beyond recognition, and her authority does not excel in combat, it is still not something he can deal with. With a scoff, although at the beginning of the new era, Erebus too had entertained the idea of making friends with Zeus, but that was predicated on him at least showing the power and abilities that Cronus had. However, at least from the new king's performance in the last century, the Lord of Darkness saw no such potential in him. Of course, maybe it was too soon. Cronus took a long time to change his fortunes, so for now, Erebus chose to wait and see. Come with me. Since you are now the owner of the life vase, indeed there is a place I could use you. Chapter 354. She spoke faintly, as Erebus calmly announced his decision. Just right, you are an elf, and so were they, although they have died. Even if there are gaps between worlds, there should still be some similarities. But why should I leave this place with you? And what do you have to guarantee that I won't be chased by Mother Earth? Even understanding the gulf between them, facing the demand of the Lord of Darkness, Moanda still asked this question. Staying here meant facing the awakened Gaia, yet the one before her did not seem like a force for good. If leaving one danger was only to enter another, then what was the point of it all? Guarantee. The Styx rivers bind on me is negligible, and there's nothing else I can offer to make you believe. But in this world, everything can be fake. Only interests are true. Unruffled by Moanda's skepticism, the Lord of Darkness simply placed some special information into the life vase in front of her. This wasn't manufactured information, but more like a memory that seemed to be engraved in the fabric of reality. After finishing, Erebus spread his hands open, gesturing for her to take it. After a moment of hesitation, Moanda still accepted the artifact that symbolized material life. Life and plants fitted so well together, or more like plants were, in fact, at the convergence of nature and life. When the artifact merged with the trunk of the golden apple tree, nourished by its prime liquid, Moanda felt her already formidable power become even more extraordinary. Like sun and light, these interrelated powers could easily produce an effect where 1 + 1 was greater than 2. But with increased power, Moanda became even more aware of the unfathomable strength beneath the thin frame of the man before her. Dispelling some wishful thoughts, the elf began to read the information that had been sent. After a while, Moanda came to a realization. She knew what he wanted her to do. "You're right. Everything can be fake. Only interests are real." Understanding her own value, the elf finally let down her guard somewhat. As long as she was of use to him, she at least wouldn't face the worst outcome. By contrast, what Gaia would do upon sensing her betrayal was unpredictable to Moanda. Because in her eyes, Mother Earth was capable of anything, even if it would be harmful to both of them without any benefit. "Good. Then follow me. I will conceal the traces of your departure and lead them in another direction." Nodding, Erebus lightly touched her. Supreme power enveloped the space, making everything that happened today a part of the secret. But a too perfect concealment would immediately make Gaia suspect him, so he left a tiny clue. It wouldn't clear his suspicion. Once Mother Earth came to her senses afterward, she could figure out who was behind it all, because he couldn't hide what he was going to do next from others. In fact, Erebus intended to have Gaia play her last card, for based on his knowledge, his sister wasn't likely to think much upon awakening, but to act first and think later. In time, he would also get to see whether the successor of Olympus, after 2 generations of divine kings, was truly as weak as rumored, or if there was some other ace up his sleeve. While pondering, under the gaze of Erebus, a figure slowly materialized from the center of the golden apple tree's trunk. She had a green dress and a gentle face, and at a glance, she bore a slight resemblance to Gaia when she was still youthful and full of origin. Just as the nymphs born from plants have a physical form but still walk the world in a form akin to a deity, Moanda reshaped her body and once again stepped on the ground. Turning to look at the tall golden apple tree, the elf raised the green vase, and as a force of suction emerged, the tree disappeared from the spot, leaving only a huge pit on the ground. The barrier left by Gaia separated the inside from the outside. Any attempt to move the tree would trigger Mother Earth's power, but the life vase was different. This divine artifact could perfectly conceal its aura, rendering Gaia's power ineffective, as it originated from the same source. Picking up the body she once inhabited on the ground, along with her former oak form, Moanda hesitated, then also took the bodies of Veda and a few friends she was close to. As for the rest, they were no longer her concern. If they were smart enough to perceive what happened in the orchard, they should flee as far as possible and at least not stay on the earth. Otherwise, when Mother Earth awoke, the elf did not think Gaia in her fury would distinguish whether these nymphs were innocent or not. "I'm ready." Stepping out of the barrier, indeed, Mother Earth's power did not react to the artifact that originally belonged to her. Across from Moanda, Erebus also nodded and opened a pathway directly to the underworld. But before leaving, as if remembering something, a black glow emerged on the Lord of Darkness. He glanced into the void, and then, with a slight flicker, the black glow disappeared, apparently heading toward some very deep recess of space-time. After finishing his last task, Erebus immediately departed, and the golden apple orchard once again became quiet, leaving only the huge pit at the center hidden by an illusion. Chapter 355. Darkness enveloped all, time itself seemed to blur. When Moanda glimpsed light once more, the surroundings had changed dramatically. A pale purple moon hung in the sky, an invisible force following the moonlight, shining on the gray earth. A river of lava divided different regions, its intense heat reminding Moanda of the sun above the heavens. Indeed, the elf did not know that it was originally a part of the sun. Beyond the river of fire and the nether moon, Moanda saw beings that were neither living nor dead wandering aimlessly not far from the ground. They emitted a negative aura, provoking an instinctive aversion in the elf. She detested the sensation of being at odds with life. Thus she extended her hand, and with divine power flowing, mercilessly snuffed out the soul fire burning within their skulls. It was Moanda's first time using divine power against foes, and although they were only mortals, her spirits were nonetheless lifted considerably. "Enough, don't waste more time on these things. Unless you can pick the nether moon, cutting off its moonlight or permanently transform the environment of the underworld, causing the pervasive energy here to dissipate completely. You're only exerting effort in vain, said a voice. From the shadows stepped Erebus, casting a casual glance at the lives that had turned to dust. Although he too found these mindless, fearless creatures bothersome, under the nether moon's radiance, their birth was endless. Compared to the wraiths transformed from the corpses of earthly beings, these naturally born wraiths were nearly infinite. The density of the underworld's essence in an area and the strength of the nether moon's light often decided their numbers. If their number increased too much, they would starve to death. If too few, they would multiply again. Over a sufficiently long period, their total number always maintained a dynamic equilibrium. These creatures are not important. Now begin your task, instructed Erebus with a light wave of his hand. Instantly, from across the boundary dividing the underworld and the realm of lightlessness, the area that seemed to consume everything, several beings flew out. Some were tall and handsome but carried dark powers in their bodies. Some were robust with skin as pale as corpses, their hair and beards pitch black. Of course, there was the most special one, a giant egg wrapped in flesh glowing with a sinister red hue. Upon that flesh, Moanda felt a chilling sensation. She even had the feeling that the flesh was watching her. Although this was only a faint premonition, it made the elf subconsciously step back. You might lack experience, but that's all right. These are ready-made templates. Using your inherent authority as an unusual deity, this shouldn't be difficult for you, said the Lord of Darkness, his gaze lingering on the giant egg for a moment before moving away. However, the future habitat for them is not the underworld. As with your current strength, it's probably impossible for you to alter the essence of life, allowing them to adapt to this environment. Fortunately, their original homeland has also come through, situated between the earth and the underworld. Therefore, you only need to make some slight adjustments, which I think you should be able to accomplish, he said calmly. I understand, but this egg, what do you want me to do with it? Asked Moanda. Nodding, Erebus affirmed that creating life according to the template was not difficult for Moanda. It would become a repetitive task once she became familiar with the power of the life vase. Yet, this dangerous-looking egg, which was alive on its own and required no additional actions from her, along with the endlessly squirming flesh, made Moanda wish to stay far away. You don't need to bother with the egg. Use the power of life within the divine artifact to suppress the other life within that flesh. That's what you must do, Erebus said, a twitch in his eye, after a brief silence. Only upon returning to chaos did the Lord of Darkness finally realize he had still underestimated that fearsome giant tree. In reality, at that interface, it appeared as though the pressure suppressing him and Lane's powers was significant, but the pressure on the tree was far greater than on them both. A remnant of a destroyed world combined with the core of the divine tree that once sustained the 9 realms. Its essence and power were far beyond Erebus's initial estimates. Even now, back in his own domain, he had not been able to completely erase the persistent force on his left hand, which clung like a malignant tumor. He could either take more time to erode this force with a certain immortality property or resolve it in another way. Luckily, this was chaos, and with the life-oriented divine artifact, utilizing the absolute nature of divine authority, Erebus could still solve this problem. I will do it. So, is this where I will live from now on? Moanda asked. With another nod, even if it was just using the divine artifact to suppress the flesh, it shouldn't be too hard. So Moanda didn't hesitate any further. She looked around, and although the life vase could hold her essence, now that the golden apple tree was no longer a seed, it could no longer stay inside indefinitely. She needed a place to replant this divine tree. Chapter 356. And the underworld is probably the least suitable place for planting vegetation, apart from the abyss. Let's pick that spot, Svartalfheim, the dark nation of the otherworld. Once these lives are created by you in the future, let them thrive there first. You can also make this vast underground world your territory. With a casual gesture, a pathway opened. In theory, the underworld, a realm unto itself, could only be entered and exited through a single portal, where the Styx River flowed, Yet this clearly wasn't a limitation for Erebus. Especially those wraiths. Do not let them occupy the underground for that so-called Hades. It's best to keep this naturally dark place ownerless. Listening to the words of the Lord of Darkness, Moanda looked towards the opposite end of the passage. She didn't like the environment over there either, but she had no choice. The earth was Gaia's very body, and no matter what, she couldn't possibly plant the golden apple tree on the surface. Moreover, this underground space might not necessarily be a bad spot for her. Although Moanda and the consciousness of the golden apple shared the body, and she shared wisdom with the other sharing its body and strength with her, there was, in fact, still a gap between them. Just as that consciousness still needed to learn and grow, for Moanda, the divine authority shared by both ultimately still favored the other. But seeing this underground world, previously undiscovered, Moanda began to conceive a method to change this situation. Gaia once created all sorts of plants in the world, but that certainly didn't include this lifeless underground realm, so if she could also create new plants here, it would not only help her familiarize with her power but also bring into the world plants that were uniquely her creations. I understand. Those wraiths, I don't like them either. The matter of creating new plants would have to wait until she had a better grasp of the underground world's environment. Tidying up the corpses of the lives from the surface, Moanda carefully lifted the giant egg and then entered the pathway opened by the Lord of Darkness. For better or worse, that place would be her new home for a considerable time to come. The figure of the elf disappeared into the portal and then vanished altogether while watching her leave. Erebus closed the temporary portal. He was in very good spirits now. Creating life was secondary. The resolution of something that had troubled him for a long time truly made him feel that his prior efforts were meaningful. Elements were not solely his to possess. Taking more or less of them didn't make much difference. But speaking of it, the magic net is indeed an interesting thing. Shaking his head gently, Erebus turned and returned to the realm of lightness. He wasn't Gaia and couldn't walk the world day in and day out like her, not to mention that, if it weren't for having things to do, he truly didn't wish to venture out often. After today, his next outing would probably be when his dear sister awoke. A seat among the audience on Mount Olympus certainly couldn't lack his presence. The spirit realm, fifth layer. In the chaotic and disordered interface, nothing had a fixed form. Only black mist roamed incessantly among the illusory stars. However, in contrast to the past, a small interface composed of positive energy and faith had taken root here. Half of it embedded within the fifth layer of the spirit realm, anchoring the surrounding chaotic space-time significantly, while its other half extended into the outside world, maintaining some temporal-spatial connection with the stars. If one observed carefully, they would see beings emitting light moving in and out, seemingly constructing this homeland in their own manner. Seven Hills Paradise, although currently only 2 layers of its outline had just been built by the reincarnated celestial clan, limited by the scarcity of the power of faith, it indeed existed and even provided some blessings akin to those of a territorial god. Of course, these blessings were now dispersed because the future Paradise Mountain didn't yet have a ruler in name. But the humming sound echoing in the interface had nothing to do with it. The true source was 4 lights of different colors floating in the void. The 4 orbs floated in the fifth layer of the spirit realm, infinitely small on the outside and infinitely large on the inside. They seemed to share a mysterious connection with each other, making them both opposing and unifying. As time ticked away, the interiors of the orbs slowly began to evolve, but as soon as the change started, the yellow orb was the first to flicker. Bang! Unable to hold on for long despite the interface's attempt to maintain stability, the yellow orb burst into pieces, causing the other 3 to become unstable as well. Watching this, Lane had no choice but to wave his hand to erase the remaining 3 orbs as well. This was not the first time this had happened, yet the result was invariably similar. Indeed, it's still not possible. The underlying layer of this world is uneven. Like life and death, without my effort, they could never achieve balance. Yet another failure. This time, Lane could no longer draw any lessons from it. Some things can't be achieved, not because of insufficient effort, but because the objective conditions simply do not allow it. In this case, he had no solution to the problem either. Let's try with that instead. Compared to the others, having the well of reincarnation, it might be more stable. Opening his palm, the fresh black gleam entering the spirit realm settled into his hand. Lane continued to gaze at the chaotic spacetime in front of him. To seek order amidst chaos, an anchor is needed, and the strength of the anchor varies with the level of chaos. The third layer of the spirit realm was the least chaotic, so dreams and minds sufficed. The fourth layer was even more so, but using the well of reincarnation to anchor it was overkill. Facing the tumultuous chaos of the fifth layer, Lane had to find another path. To suppress the chaos of the interface, use an interface. Creating a realm with Themis was one option. Doing it himself was another. Chapter 357 Trials. The world exists in a multi-tiered structure, and this is often considered a universal norm. In the vast majority of mythologies, the world is divided into two distinct realms. One that symbolizes the bright aspect and another that symbolizes the dark aspect. Even with the continuation of myth, this subdivision of the world can further evolve. Just like the 33 heavens of the East and the heaven and hell of the West seem to reflect an issue. As human society becomes more complex with development, so too presumably should the world. A multi-layered structure facilitates its internal growth and the stability of the world itself. Therefore, what Lane did previously was actually similar. He attempted to create an inner layer at the center of the fifth layer of the spirit realm, composed not of faith but purely of elements, while realms constructed from emotions, faith, and some elemental power, like the Seven Hills Paradise, became part of the outer layer, nestled on the periphery of the fifth layer of the spirit realm. With an inner and an outer layer, the chaotic spacetime was anchored in a three-dimensional ring shape, thereby enabling this layer of the realm to support life activities, even life as transcendent as that of the celestial clan. However good the concept, it failed from the start. The inner layers Lane envisioned should have been 6 in number, with the elements earth, water, wind, fire, spread out in 4 directions, categorizing the vast majority of elemental powers. Those hard to categorize were divided into positive energy and negative energy, 2 pure energy realms based on their tendencies, placed in the upward and downward directions, respectively. The 6 planes form a 3-dimensional diamond surrounding the core of the 5th layer of the spirit realm, sustaining the spacetime of the realm and corresponding distantly to the future outer layers. In the future, kingdoms of the deity-born and the illusory stars would be interspersed among them, forming the complete 5th layer of the spirit realm. While the idea was sound, when it came to actualization, Lane discovered it was utterly unworkable, not only because the spirit realm did not possess control over elements other than fire, but also because the underlying logic of the world dictated it so. Just as life and death are not balanced, neither are earth, water, wind, and fire equal. A cycle with clear disparities could not be constructed unless Lane could find a way to make the 4 elements transform into one another, maintaining balance as life and death do. This was not entirely impossible. Theoretically, if he could move the 4 elemental planes to the 4th layer of the spirit realm, then with the complete cyclical power of the well of reincarnation, stability could be maintained. But since Lane intended to establish the elemental planes to perfect the 5th layer of the spirit realm, how could he possibly make that choice? Compared to that, the transition between positive and negative is easier to balance. Even just relying on the natural dispersion of the cyclical power from the well of reincarnation, combined with the order of the realms bolstered by the Codex of Creation, should suffice to complete this step. After pondering for a moment, Lane finally gave up the idea of accomplishing it all at once. It seemed that, in order to sort out the order of the last 2 layers of the spirit realm, it had to be done bit by bit. With a gesture, the dark glimmer in Lane's palm spread out, falling below him, where the very manifestation of the world's negative energy was taking place. At the same time, the inherent negative energy within the spirit realm also gathered, evolving into a small realm constructed purely of energy. The corresponding positive energy, on the other hand, settled above Lane. However, compared to what was below, it seemed quite sparse. This was not just because the spirit realm itself did not deeply involve positive energy, but also because in Chaos World, Although life was powerful and death weak, on the whole, the negative actually outweighed the positive. Even the number of primordial gods clearly displayed this. There existed 2 primordial gods of night and darkness in the world, while day and light had only one of powerful divine power, a goddess of daylight who was even conceived by the substance of the former, making the disparity quite obvious. Although the developmental progress of the world had somewhat compensated for this inherent disparity, it still existed. So when the gathering of positive and negative energies was complete, after only a short moment of stability, the glowing orb emitting positive energy started to tremble slightly, seemingly unable to bear the burden, incapable of opposing the negative energy realm below it. But this was, after all, within the spirit realm. Seeing the nascent positive energy realm on the brink of collapse, Lane, as before, drew on part of the power of samsara and the power of the realm. And just as he had anticipated, after flickering violently a few times and under the subtle influence of the nascent Seven Hills paradise in the distance, the newly born energy realm finally stabilized. However, it seemed that Lane needed to spend more years here until the forces of both sides were brought closer by the cycles, after which he could entirely leave them to function on their own. Phew, what a hassle! Heaving a sigh, but feeling that his spirituality symbol had become a bit more complete, Lane still found it all very worthwhile. The spirit realm is the embodiment of his power. The scope of the spirit realm's coverage and its overall strength are manifestations of the spread of spirituality in the world. In his estimation, even without other gains, the mere perfection of the remaining layers of realm each would suffice to bring an increase in symbolic stature equivalent to 1 level. The same applied to other realms. If the Lord of the 9 Hells could find a leader with enough potential for each layer of the 9 Hells, perfect the natural emergence mechanism of demons, and even allow the main forces of different layers of hell to cooperate, then his power would also rise, thereby escaping his current state at the bottom of greatness. But the foundations and magnitude of hell are vastly inferior to the spirit realm, so such an increase wouldn't be as high as Lane's. Chapter 358. After finishing up the task at hand, he finally relaxed a bit. Maintaining the stability of the negative energy interface required his presence, but it was not too energy-consuming, so Lane finally had time to pay attention to what had just happened. Of course, he kept an eye on everything that happened in Mother Earth's orchard. It's just that the nymph called Moanda didn't much concern him. As Mother Earth's maid and the guardian of the Golden Apple Orchard, her only use was to serve as a tool, a means to avoid Gaia's arrangements left in the Golden Apple Orchard. Beyond that, her worth was as a teaching material. After all, if she could stab Gaia in the back, she could betray others. Though Lane was not particularly afraid of betrayal from his subordinates, he was more interested in the original consciousness of the Golden Apple Tree than in keeping such a person around. Moanda herself didn't notice, even assuming that her transmigration was supposed to be this way. But in actuality, since she saw the entire process of the Golden Apple Tree's existence from the beginning, why then didn't the consciousness share its memory with her, leaving her so naive and confused? Everything had a reason, for this memory exchange was unilaterally blocked. If the memory exchange had occurred normally, the nascent consciousness would have been tainted by Moanda's complex memories and become an existence similar yet different from her, which was not what Lane wanted to see. So, he blocked it unilaterally, allowing only her spirit to awaken, and then let her rest peacefully within the body of the Golden Apple Tree, sharing everything Moanda saw and perceived, yet untouched by her thoughts. Under these circumstances, what she could learn from Moanda, this teaching material, was her own affair. Strictly speaking, the other was the original consciousness of the Golden Apple Tree, just like a born deity. Lane helped awaken her wisdom and continue the growth interrupted by Gaia, which was certainly feasible, but to go further and directly do something to her was beyond his power. However, speaking of which, I thought that elf would seek out Zeus, or even come to me in the end. Bumping into Erebus was indeed a bit unexpected, he mused. Shaking his head, Lane was slightly surprised but quickly became indifferent. The inherent will of the current era favored the existence of more intelligent life, so exerting some subtle influence was possible. After all, the original trajectory of destiny was fixed, making the presence of the era seem rigid and stiff, but when facing the underground world, a place originally outside of fate, it still showed a bit of tendency. Of course, it was still just a bit. Primordial gods still had the possibility of choosing to personify, while the world itself had absolutely no chance to choose. Unless the world was destroyed and then birthed a taboo life like the Flesh Mother tree. Besides, there's also this ransom. Better to just let her remain there. Glancing at the newly formed negative energy interface, Lane decided to let things take their own course, which was in line with his plans. After all, what Moanda was doing was exactly what he desired. To create a life form that could proliferate in the underground world, Moanda was indeed suitable. For the underground world that had just appeared, not even the surface of the spirit realm had had time to cover it. Indeed, making life possible there required someone to work hard at it. The current era Olympus. The affairs of the underground were still beyond the Divine King's notice. After all, he hadn't even thoroughly dominated the surface yet. As lightning streaked across the sky, he hurried back to Mount of the Gods. It was only upon returning to this place where the shackles of the current era were absent that the divine power surging within him restored some of Zeus's confidence. The matter about Artemis could only be set aside for now. He would wait until he had completed some of the rituals before addressing it. Currently, what he needed to consider was another matter. Apollo, his eldest son. He needed him to grow up as quickly as possible and become the first real aide he could freely command by his side. However, to do this perfectly, the Divine King still needed a good assistant. Hera. I wonder if she's still on Mount of the Gods right now. I suppose I need to find her. Just as he landed in front of the palace and prepared to summon the god of West Wind for information, Zeus unexpectedly found the resigned wind gods and Hera waiting there together. In fact, he was prepared for Hera to ignore his command and angrily leave to trouble Leto. But it seemed his heavenly empress was still considerate of the bigger picture. Of course, it was also possible that she realized the irreversibility of the situation. After all, Apollo was already born, and whatever she did was meaningless. Hera, my dear, what brings you here today? He asked. With 100 thoughts swirling in his mind but appearing as if he knew nothing, Zeus simply waved his hand. Seeing this unmistakable gesture, Zephyrus quickly transformed into wind and departed, leaving the Divine King couple alone. Why pretend to be clueless, Zeus? I wield the divine authority of fertility far more adeptly than you, and just because they are not my offspring doesn't mean I am unaware of their arrival. Hera scoffed coldly, yet she waited for Zephyrus to leave before speaking. Looking at the Divine King before her, her previously calm mood soured once again. Chapter 359. If shamelessness were to be graded, Hera thought, Zeus would be the mightiest of the primordial gods, even comparable to the world itself. Now that you know, I won't hide it from you. Hera, it is as you know, Leto bore me children, but it's irreversible. The Divine King's firstborn is no nobler than the other gods. He cannot inherit anything of mine, and you have no reason to be infuriated about this. As if he hadn't heard Hera's sarcasm, Zeus smiled, took Hera's hand despite her objections. Leto can't compare to you. You are the most noble woman in this world. I was willing to share my authority with you before, and soon I will declare you again, to be above the pantheon gods, equal in status to me, a distinction that is yours alone. What did you say? Slightly surprised, she stopped struggling. Hera had expected Zeus to utter more sweet nothings, but she didn't anticipate such a promise from him. Yes, it's a plan I've had for a long time. As I've said, the ranks among the pantheon gods were originally undistinguished, even for the son of the Divine King. Everyone followed the ancient rules, dividing ranks by their own power, but this is wrong. It should not be deities holding power for status, but gods granted status by the Divine King should have power equal to their status. That's the true expression of power. He looked earnest, at least in that moment Zeus's words seemed sincere. I will establish 12 principal gods, higher than all others, to rule the mortal realm with me. And you will be the one equal to me. So you say, are you using this method to placate me? It seems you really are fond of Leto. She spoke with irony again. But now, Hera's anger had subsided. Zeus was willing to share authority with her, and now was willing to make their status equal. Although she knew that nominal equality didn't mean true equivalence, it still made her feel his intentions. More importantly, Leto was no ordinary being, not even a territorial god. For these, the heavenly empress could genuinely seek revenge. But as a true god, Leto was immortal, and whatever Hera did wouldn't really matter in the grand scheme. Still, to prevent any future transgressions, Hera was not ready to let things slide easily. She was about to recount Zeus's glorious feats, but in the next moment, his words made her think she had heard wrong. "No, I don't want you to just let things be. On the contrary, you can send someone to attack Leto and that child in a few years." His expression calm. He spoke indifferently as he looked at Hera's astonished face. "But the attack will only be temporary. After that, I want you to send that attacker to Delphi. It harmed my offspring, so it must be killed by him in front of the temple of the gods. But one way or another, you will have vented your anger, will you not?" Somewhat speechless, Hera didn't expect Zeus to make such a decision. Although she had previously disliked Leto, she felt a momentary pity for her. A wrong choice leading to a wrong fate, that's the sad fate of the goddess of nursery. But that was only for a moment. The heavenly empress quickly came to her senses. Whatever happened to others was their affair and had nothing to do with her. Besides, those who wreck other people's marriages deserved such an outcome. "This is your saying, Zeus, so don't you regret it later." Pulling her hand away, Hera snorted and walked away. But from the sound of her footsteps, it was clear she was much happier than when she had arrived. "Of course, how could she compare to you, Hera? You are the heavenly empress, my only one." Behind her, watching the heavenly empress's retreating figure, Zeus stood silently for a while. Once Hera had vanished, he returned to his divine palace. Sitting on his own couch, Zeus reached out, taking the scepter of the divine king. This divine artifact, set with 3 gemstones, still seemed so feeble, as if testifying to the weak authority of the 3rd-generation divine king. Compared to his own kingship, the divine king indeed cared less about Leto. Or rather, his relationship with Leto wasn't even born out of affection, so he didn't have feelings of love for her. But his proposal today had other reasons. He didn't tell Hera the whole truth because she still carried another unborn divine child. If he had told her, Hera would have insisted that the opportunity be given to her child. But Zeus didn't want to wait. Once Apollo grew up, and in front of the oracle of Delphi where the pantheon's power resided, he would proclaim his existence and receive the power given by Zeus. When Zeus brought him back to Mount of the Gods in front of all the gods in the grandest manner and married him to the most beautiful goddess, even if Apollo had resentment towards his father, it would vanish like smoke in thin air. With this opportunity, Zeus could also announce his plan to establish 12 principal gods and then turn that subsequent coronation ceremony into part of the ritual, securing half of his kingship. "I really appreciate your sacrifices, but in this world, it's still the unscrupulous that live the best," he murmured softly. At that moment, the colossal shadow that once cast infinite dread in Zeus's mind seemed to quiver. That father god, who once drove him to despair, didn't seem so distant now. "Father God, I wonder where you are now. Dead? I don't believe it. But no matter where you've gone, as long as I rule this world, I will find you. Then I'll tell you that not only have I learned what you taught me well, but I'll also return it to you. And Gaia, mother of all gods, every change in the divine king involved you. Since you're so restless, use yourself as my first stepping stone. Kingship is about obedience, whether it's the 12 principal gods or other subordinate deities. As long as they revere him, it will further strengthen the power of the divine king." Now, Zeus no longer feared the awakening of his grandmother. Perhaps her awakening was even a good thing. As time flowed like water, and the mortal realm remained uneventful, time hurriedly passed since the birth of Apollo and Artemis. Chapter 360, The Island of Lemnos. Since the flood wiped out civilization, and the mortal realm was in turmoil, countless springs and autumns have passed over the land. To the deities, this wasn't an excessively long period, but for humans, it had already become an era too significant to ignore. It was long enough for a newborn to grow into adulthood, long enough for their migrating paths to traverse mountains and seas, and long enough for mortals to establish new institutions during the process. However, this time there was no Prometheus to guide them, and the gods likewise did not interfere in this process. Except for the followers of the goddess of Huthfire bringing the knowledge of the old era under the divine will, the new generation of humans was entirely in a state of natural growth. They learned of the existence of deities in this world and saw those terrifying behemoths from the west retreat before the sacred fire. They marveled at the greatness of nature, worshipped the sun, the moon, and rivers, and, although the deities never directly revealed themselves, among the mortals, there was still a considerable amount of faith and adoration for them. However, this era was not just characterized by warmth. Hidden behind it was more primeval strife and slaughter. As they migrated eastward, the humans, originally assembled in one place, gradually drifted apart, and when they reunited, they often faced not friendly exchanges but cruel fights to the death. Only when granaries are full can one learn manners, and only when food and clothing are sufficient can one understand honor and disgrace. But without the care of a prescient deity, and without a suitable place to settle down and develop, the new generation of humans often lived in the uncertainty of not knowing if they would see the next day. They would fight each other for food and engage in combat with other human groups that discovered the same habitable plains. In this process, a special class emerged among humans. This was knowledge once passed down by Cohen among humans, a method to strengthen the body, refine the blood, and increase strength. It was brought to humans by the followers of Hestia, along with the knowledge of the old era, and during the entire migration, it sparked an unparalleled burst of inspiration in different human tribes. In Cohen's hands, it was merely a summary of the golden human king's path to becoming stronger. Although he was the founder of the system, he didn't delve deeply into it. He was not even very clear on how he made progress below the transcendent fifth-order realm. Or rather, more precisely, as the first golden humanity, his natural gift made him overlook various challenges, advancing like a juggernaut without paying attention. And by the time Cohen turned back to understand, he had already stood too high to personally experience the feel of ordinary humans progressing step by step. Apart from Cohen, in the hands of bronze humanity, it was merely an optional ability. Previously on the Aurora Plains, there was no fighting among humans, and this method to empower oneself could only be used on wild beasts. At that time, humans had no need to venture outwards. Instead of combat, they were keener on learning how to avoid danger. Thus, in a short span of a decade or so, no real developments were made on this transcendent path. It remained rough and basic and would have been more of a joke if not for Cohen. But now things were different. Among the fourth generation of humans, facing the threats of migration and wars with their own kind, in an environment where only the fittest survived, the basic instinct for life to survive was ignited, sparking different flames of wisdom. Many died in this process, the majority accomplished little, but some individuals with extraordinary talents achieved differing results. They found their own direction on the very first transcendent path of humanity. These individuals, with their powers, gained followers and became the leaders of different human groups. And after finding suitable places to live, with the support of their people, they completed their transformation in status from chieftains to kings. However, in this era, whether as kings or high-ranking officials, responsibilities far outweighed rights. Although they possessed a status far above the ordinary people, they also necessarily had abilities far beyond others. Even their descendants often had to earn their position through martial prowess and merits, rather than being born extraordinary. So, as the years went by, traces of human presence gradually spread out into the distance. Step by step, they covered the entire eastern region with human existence. At the same time, huge cities were erected in the southeastern part of the land with the help of the goddess of the magic net. A migrating group heading north finally halted its steps, and even deep within the earth, new species began to emerge. But at that moment, there was still no contact or exchange between them. Perhaps the beginning of it all would have to wait for the emergence of another catalyst. This catalyst could be called Typhon, could be the founding of Athens or the birth of Mycenae. But whichever it was, it wouldn't be far off. The East Sea, the island of Lemnos. Above the Great Sea, the waves churned tumultuously, Yet as they approached this small island, they quieted down. This was not a normal phenomenon, but those who witnessed it were not surprised, for the island, originally known for its unpredictable currents and climate, had become harmonious in weather since a decade ago. On its surface, the eastern region was comprised of a vast plain, the west rugged with rocky terrain, and at the center stood a towering mountain belching billowing smoke. Such islands were not uncommon at sea, but in recent years, traces of human activity had emerged here. Chapter 361. They sowed their seeds there, built their cities there, and even had the objects of their worship and belief, which lent this originally ordinary little island an air of civilization. Ding! Ding! Clang! Sparks flew as the hammer and iron collided, creating a thunderous noise. In an open space, a short and ugly smith showcased his skill, while hundreds of humans gathered around him. Unlike the deities or even the nymphs who served them, there was no mockery or contempt for the smith's appearance among these humans. Instead, they showed respect and excitement, learning the smithing techniques displayed before them. This was the sea, different from the land, where the people who lived here had never experienced migration or the threat of other creatures. Sea beasts did not fancy the land, and the rulers of the sea didn't wish those lowly creatures to harm the just thriving humans. Thus, the vast islands were often enjoyed solely by humans, who built cities and engaged in fishing or farming upon them. Of course, when avoiding the threat of other life forms, these humans also faced the more capricious natural climate. Be it storms or tsunamis, any could wipe out their homes in an instant. And what's more terrifying was the volcano that stood upon the island. Etna, a volcano that had once suppressed Typhon in some myths, although it might not have that honor in the true mythic world, still was undeniably terrifying to mortals. Just 10 years ago, the people of the island of Lemnos had witnessed the erupting lava and the nearly destructive deluge. It was on that day this short, ugly man first showed his divine power. He made the lava flow backward, cleared the smoke, and then told the mortals his name, Hephaestus, who wielded volcanoes and magma. To thank this deity for his help, they named their city Hephaestia and built the temple for him, praying he would forever appease the volcano that brought hot springs and minerals to the island, so it would never erupt again. Since then, Hephaestus, who had been raised by Nereus' daughter, Thetis, often visited the city that bore his name. Here, he felt the respect and adoration of the people, a contrast to the attitude of the sea god and the nymphs. The veneration of mortals offered some solace to his somewhat twisted heart under the gaze of mockery and disdain. Ding! Clang! Let's stop here for today. Go home and ponder, I have a guest to attend to, he said. With a final strike, Hephaestus looked at the short sword in the fire with some disappointment. He was indifferent to the high temperature and casually tossed the red-hot short sword aside. It was a failed piece, and naturally, there was no point in processing it further. Smithing was not his inherent godhood, but it was certainly his hobby, and he was quite good at it. Perhaps due to the anomaly of Hera during Hephaestus's conception, or perhaps due to some other reason, this indeed gave him an ugly appearance but also bestowed him with some abilities different from those of other deities. Like the Cyclops, Hephaestus had a natural gift for smithing. Yet, compared to his skill, he found his creativity was quite limited. That was why he taught humans. Hephaestus found that many of the ideas proposed by humans might be difficult for them to achieve, but for him they were precious inspiration. As you command, Your Highness, may you be everlasting, came the voice of a man, seemingly of higher status, who stepped forward and bowed, leading the others to bow respectfully before dispersing. Soon, only Hephaestus remained. He dusted off his hands and finally turned to the shade of a nearby tree. It appeared empty, but Hephaestus spoke as if to someone, his tone indifferent. Come out. I don't know who you are or what you're here for, but you can come out now. I've lived on the island of Lemnos for over a decade, and your little trick can't fool me. There was no response as his words fell. Just when Hephaestus grew impatient, the shadows beneath the tree shimmered, and a stranger's figure emerged. The arrival seemed embarrassed, apparently not expecting to be caught spying. He had concealed his form with the manipulation of light and come to the island rumored to be inhabited by a deity, only to witness the smithing process of Hephaestus. The young deity was so captivated that he had failed to realize he had already been spotted, which made him somewhat embarrassed. Meanwhile, the appearance of the stranger caused Hephaestus's expression to darken. He was a handsome, tall young man with golden hair, confident and full of fighting spirit, the complete opposite of Hephaestus. One born to shine in light, the other discarded at birth. Even though he didn't recognize the stranger, it didn't prevent the revulsion he felt at that moment. That's why he preferred the company of humans. After all, Hephaestus was a god. He could ignore the humans' beauty and vigor, as they would eventually age. But now, the one before him was also a deity, which made him subconsciously feel repulsed. Chapter 362. I am truly sorry, Your Excellency, but I did not intend to spy. It's just that your skill is so exquisite that I forgot to reveal my form. Apologizing sincerely, Apollo spoke from the heart. He noticed the other's changing complexion, but the young deity still thought it was due to his own rudeness, making him feel even more embarrassed. In fact, I came here specifically to inquire about a matter. Your behavior hardly matches your looks, stranger deity. No more excuses. We have nothing to discuss. Hephaestus dismissed the apology without a second thought in a cold voice. Faced with this, Apollo furrowed his brows slightly but, considering his purpose for the visit, he steeled himself. I apologize once again for my actions, but Prince Hephaestus, I also hope you can understand my feelings and listen to the injustice I have suffered. Before I was born, my mother goddess and I were persecuted by the heavenly empress, who prevented me from descending to the mortal realm so her child could be born before me. Her schemes failed, and I eventually arrived in the mortal realm, but this only made her even angrier. A serpent of immense strength was sent by Hera. It guarded the land and forced my mother, stripped of her divine power, to wander the seas raising me. Now, I must find that serpent to prove to the world that the dignity of the heavenly empress is inviolable, but so is Apollo's. With a grave expression, Apollo was prepared to be rejected again, but if so, he would have no choice but to seek others who might know of the place. Unexpectedly, after listening to Apollo's story, Hephaestus's demeanor underwent a subtle change. He glanced at the unfamiliar god and asked for confirmation. You mean you were persecuted by the heavenly empress, and now you wish to seek retribution? Yes, that is precisely what I intend to do. Nodding, Apollo didn't know why the other's attitude changed, whether it was his words that had moved him or something else. He chose to approach Hephaestus precisely because, despite being the foster son of the sea god's daughter, there were rumors that he didn't get along well with the sea gods. He didn't want his grievances against the heavenly empress to be known to the other deities of Olympus prematurely, so Apollo had few to consult. As for his mother goddess Leto, she indeed knew where Delphi was, but she insisted her son find that most ancient temple on his own. This is a test from your father, she told Apollo. Although the young deity didn't want any tests, he agreed nonetheless. Seeking trouble with the heavenly empress. Interesting, but Apollo, you might not be quite qualified for that. After sizing Apollo up, Hephaestus quickly surmised that this was a younger deity than himself. His godhood strength was still undetermined, but with such feeble divine power, how could he possibly stand against Hera? Even if the heavenly empress was not as powerful as the divine king, after sharing some of Zeus's authority, she remained a formidable goddess. So I come seeking a piece of information, Prince Hephaestus. I want to know where Delphi is located, for there lies both the whereabouts of that serpent and a means for me to gain strength. Leto had informed Apollo that the serpent that once prevented them from approaching the land now lived on the plains of Delphi, and there, his father had left treasures for him. Apollo harbored doubts about the father he had never met, but he still believed the words of his mother. It sounds intriguing, and since you aim to vex the heavenly empress, I might offer you my help, but in return, you'll have to agree to a condition. Indifferent, Hephaestus didn't really care whether Apollo succeeded or not. Causing some trouble for that woman was enough. Ever since his arrival, the heavenly empress seemed to have forgotten him, and compared to the scorn of other creatures, this was even harder for him to accept. And facing his request, although Apollo didn't know about the god before him and the heavenly empress's past grievances, he accepted earnestly and with visible joy. Of course, should you resolve my quandary today, I too will fulfill my promise when the time comes that you need it. This is Apollo's pledge to you, and I will surely honor it. Chapter 363. Io disappearing at the end of the world. Having received the promise of Apollo, Hephaestus no longer played coy. He gave a detailed account of the terrain in different parts of the earth, the location of Olympus, and the oracle of Delphi beneath the Parnassus mountain range. These were all things his foster mother had told him, and in fact, Hephaestus had never been there himself, but this was enough for Apollo. Now that he knew where his destination lay, the young deity solemnly thanked him and once again assured him, "Prince Hephaestus, I will remember your assistance today, no matter what. On the day you need me in the future, I will fulfill my promise and do my part." "Let's hope so, Apollo, but you may leave now. The earth is vast, and finding Delphi based only on my description is no simple task." Nodding, Hephaestus's demeanor was still rather unenthusiastic. Though they had a common goal for the time being, he still didn't care to linger any longer with this handsome, radiant deity. To such an obliquely dismissive gesture, Apollo paid no mind, thanking Hephaestus and choosing to leave immediately. Perhaps he will succeed? Who knows? Watching the direction in which Apollo had departed, Hephaestus shook his head. He wasn't optimistic about the other's chances, yet he didn't believe Apollo would come to any harm, for after all, he was an immortal true god. Picking up his hammer, Hephaestus began another bout of forging. His skills were not yet finely honed. In comparison to the Cyclops, while he possessed the same natural talent, he still needed ample time to practice. At least for now, he could not treat godhood as a material to craft a true divine artifact. Of course, what Hephaestus wanted was never a divine artifact. He merely hoped that one day, he might create imposing substitutes to cover for his unsightly and diminutive appearance. Elsewhere, having left the island of Lemnos, Apollo began his journey to find the Delphi temple. Much like the heroes of future human generations, he encountered many different people along the way and did many deeds. There were injured humans, hospitable river gods, malevolent demonic monsters, and nymphs being chased by wild beasts. He used his warm light to heal human wounds, solved a problem for a river god by killing a hydra that had been lurking upstream, slew demons coveting his bloodline, and helped the nymphs drive away strange beasts. To repay Apollo's help, an elf that had sprung from a birch tree gifted him a silver bow. Said to be the creation of Titans, it possessed extraordinary power, becoming a treasure Apollo treasured greatly. With its aid, the journey for the young deity became much smoother. With the bow's support, more strange beasts perished under his arrows, and many mortals were saved thanks to him. As he progressed, the name Apollo with the silver bow began to spread among the territorial gods and mortals who had survived the flood. Gradually, they became aware of a deity bringing light, healing wounds, and willing to help others, searching for the oracle of Delphi, intending to slay a wicked serpent there. Though no one knew the origin of this god, nor had he ever spoken of his lineage, both humans and gods alike blessed him, hoping he would achieve his goal. All this was observed by Helios, who steered the sun chariot across the sky, and he reported everything to the divine king who was closely watching it all. He didn't like Apollo because, unlike others, the god of sun immediately recognized the other's divine authority, the power of light. Just as his father, Titan god Hyperion, had his dominion diminished, Apollo had split the light of his mother, Thea. But dislike as he might, with the mother of light having withdrawn from the world and himself about to ascend to great divine power, Helios suppressed such subjective feelings, dutifully reporting Apollo's deeds to Zeus each day without doing anything unnecessary. After all, there was no direct conflict between the two at the moment, and Apollo remained the son of the divine king. Helios couldn't conceive any reason they would be adversaries. So along the way, he has helped numerous human migrants who haven't yet settled down, restored health to the injured and ill, and thus they regard him as a protector of their travels and a deity of healing? Zeus asked Helios, who had just finished his day's duties, while standing before the palace of the divine king in the evening. Yes, your majesty. Nodding, perhaps emboldened by his impending ascension, Helios appeared quite confident. He looked at Zeus and offered a suggestion. Do I need to prevent his interactions with humans? His current location is not far from Olympus. If he is allowed to continue, it might lead to a repeat of Prometheus's old tale. Speaking of the foresight Prometheus, Helios initially mentioned him casually, but his tone suddenly paused. In that moment, the god of sun suddenly remembered the warning the other had given him below the great maelstrom of the East Sea. You need not worry now, but if another deity capable of driving the sun chariot is born in the future, you must be careful. Could that being be Apollo? But Helios wasn't the only one who had heard that warning. It had also been heard by Kratos and Bia, who were escorting Prometheus. Helios didn't know if they had told the divine king about this. If they had, then why would Zeus have him report about Apollo? Chapter 364. Without much thought, Helios slightly lowered his head, avoiding Zeus's gaze. He couldn't fathom the reason behind it, but that didn't prevent him from sensing a bit of unease. You don't need to concern yourself with Apollo any further. His connection with humans isn't that deep, certainly nowhere near Prometheus's level, and since I have allowed Hestia's followers to interact with mortals, there's no need to stop Apollo. Zeus waved his hand, signaling that the god of sun was dismissed. As for the fame that Apollo had left behind in the mortal realm, it was actually a good thing for the divine king. After all, he wasn't Poseidon or any other deity. He was the son of the divine king, and once the other's identity became public, all the fame that Apollo had gained would partly fall to Zeus. After all, it was all a trial given by the divine king himself. Come to think of it, this could also be a decent strategy? His eyes brightened as he watched Helios's retreating figure. Zeus suddenly realized that Apollo's behavior could be further extended. The other was at least a god, so even if he was his son, the achievements would not all be credited to the divine king. For it's not unusual among the gods for offspring to surpass their parents. But if he could have some demigod progeny, or merely descendants with divine blood, that would be different. Moreover, for those humans who had already established steady dwellings, Zeus was considering how to spread his faith. His previous idea was to stage a divine revelation. A storm would suddenly arise, torrents of rain would fall, and mortals would be at a loss. Then someone who had received a revelation would step out, suggesting that everyone should pray to the great king of the thousand thunders. Afterward, he would go through various tribulations, and finally Zeus would descend a miracle, granting them the power of divine arts. It was an inspiration he got from Hestia's followers. Feeling somewhat envious of the humans' piety, the divine king wanted to replicate it. Everything would come from the mortal's own pleas, not from his initiative, a quite good idea indeed. But now, the divine king suddenly realized he had another method. Not only was it useful, but it also appealed to his own wishes. If work and hobby could be combined into one, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Perhaps making the kings among humans into descendants with my divine blood would be a more permanent solution? He cast a glance at another splendid palace, the divine palace of Hera. Zeus could already anticipate her reaction, but it hardly mattered. He would give it a try, and if it proved effective, only then would he really start his plans after Apollo returned. As for how the first experiment would turn out, that was not the divine king's concern. If the subject were a god, he might need to consider the perceptions of the other deities. But for a mortal, whatever he did, the gods would, at most, find him somewhat ridiculous without any further thoughts. A single whim from Zeus could be a disaster for mortals, but for the gods it was just another topic of casual conversation. Perhaps because Zeus hadn't shown his true formidable power for a long time, the other deities gradually became less hesitant to discuss matters relating to him, like the once Métis. The gods lamented that Hera's progeny had already been born, and although not yet grown, his sharp godhood undoubtedly indicated his distinction. Yet Métis did not leave behind any offspring of her own, and even the god of the ocean and his spouse didn't seem to care much about her. And such as the divine king's history of infidelity and Queen Hera's anger, which seemed to have become an old tale. Previously, it had been confined to discussions among the gods, but unexpectedly, this time Zeus had turned his attention to mortals. Near a newly established human city-state, the divine king once again did what he does best. Inachus, the king of Pislacius, the monarch who led his people to clear the wilderness and establish their home, had a beautiful and captivating daughter. Her name was Io. Although she did not possess a transcendent physique but only that of a mortal, her beauty was such that it could move the hearts of deities, a graceful and alluring figure. Yet, as with every such woman recorded in later myths, her beauty did not bring her happiness but instead brought calamity. Zeus came to the mortal realm. He wielded his authority to gather the clouds, shielding away the gaze that Helios might have cast from his sun chariot. Then, in the meadow called Lerna, the divine king successfully impregnated her with his first demigod offspring. His experiment was a success. As Zeus's bloodline was conceived in the body of the royal human, he felt a faint connection beginning to form. But this link was still unstable because Io was only a princess, and this was just a common city-state among the new generation of humans. He still had more to do. He needed his progeny to become the future ruler of this human city-state, to make this descendant with divine blood a clear sign of divinely sanctioned kingship. Starting with him, the future of humanity would see more rulers bearing his lineage, and the divine king's presence would penetrate every corner of human society. One day mortals might even equate Zeus with king, thus achieving his grand endeavor. But although everything seemed well conceived, this was after all just a trial. Faced with the raging Hera, Zeus still chose to take a step back for the moment. Chapter 365. News of Apollo's deed would soon reach Hera, and before that happened, Zeus did not wish to provoke his queen of gods too much. The divine king took a step back, and facing Hera, there was only the helpless mortal princess. From this moment on, the curtain rose on Io's half-life of suffering. The princess of Pislacius was transformed by Zeus into a cow with his increasingly proficient sacred power, in order to escape Hera's gaze. But Io did not know. In fact, Zeus did not expect this to fool the other party. He was simply using this method to soothe the heavenly empress's fury. If he had acted as if he did not care in the slightest, indicating to Hera that she could deal with the mortal he had chosen at will, then the heavenly empress would have nowhere to vent her anger. But his attempt to conceal Io's presence, easily uncovered by Hera, gave the heavenly empress a sense of victory, allowing her to indulge in the identity of a winner, diminishing the impact of another betrayal of marriage by Zeus. Thus, around the existence of Io, a ridiculous struggle unfolded between the divine king and the heavenly empress. Zeus turned her into a snow-white cow, and Hera pretended to be oblivious. She praised Io's outstanding appearance among the herd, then claimed her for herself, and ordered her to be strictly guarded. The former princess was henceforth to feed on sweet grass and drink polluted water, and even failed to recognize her father Inachus when he came looking for his daughter, only to immerse herself in pain day in and day out. The divine king was reluctant to admit defeat, so he sent his confidant once more to kill the guards and secretly set Io free, allowing her to regain her freedom. But this was still just part of the struggle, as Zeus had even forgotten to turn the human princess back into her human form. So, shortly thereafter, Hera captured a tsetse fly, baptized it with divine blood, and commanded it to relentlessly pursue Io. Thus, the princess who still had not returned to human form continued to flee desperately and helplessly across the world, forever unable to escape this unmerited calamity. Hera was finally satisfied, feeling that her wisdom had triumphed over the divine king, and that the mortal had received her due punishment. Zeus also got what he wanted. He successfully appeased his heavenly empress and avoided more turmoil at this critical time. As for Io, even though she really was beautiful and had once provided him with a pleasant evening, this did not compel the ruthless divine king to spare her a single glance. There are many mortals. Io was not special. Once Apollo returned to the Mount of the Gods, Zeus would naturally find another beautiful woman to spread his bloodline among the kings of humans. Everything was supposed to continue this way. Mortals could not affect the eternal divinities, and even if the present world put shackles on the gods, the humans of the Third Era were still just playthings in the hands of the divinities. Yet fate is so wonderful. Even the beings that stand above the mortal world cannot truly glimpse the trajectory of its operation. So, one day, under the starry night sky, as the ancient Mother Night awoke from within a flower petal and looked outside with boredom, she saw, above the vast ocean, at the edge of the world, a snow-white little cow dodging the tsetse fly that was closing in behind it. She leaped forward as before, each time trying to put a greater distance, but this time was somewhat unusual, because with that leap, her figure simply vanished into thin air above the sea, without leaving the slightest trace. Whoosh! A rift tore open in the void, behind it the eternal night sky and the resplendent stars. Nyx stepped out, and the profound East Sea inexplicably quieted down. Under the shifting veil of her black dress, the goddess's expression showed a hint of surprise. So, where did she go? Curiously observing her surroundings, Nyx reached out her hand, and the nearby space-time began to warp. The laws of the present world reacted faintly to the primordial god's violent actions, but she paid it no mind. Mother Night's power surged forth, meticulously investigating every inch of this void. She was looking for a space-time tunnel or something else akin to an interface like the remnants of the fallen Nine Realms, but the results were disappointing. There was nothing here. Everything was so ordinary, as if everything she had seen before was but an illusion. However, that was impossible under Nyx's gaze. Even the beings that control the divine authority of spacetime, at the very least, would allow Mother Night to realize that all of this was man-made and not given by heaven. Heavenly given? The investigation yielded nothing, but Nyx's interest only grew stronger. Behind everything that seemed normal lay something utterly unexpected. No one could disappear silently in front of her. Even in the spirit realm, she had just been unable to enter, not unable to find. But now, the facts were in front of her, and Nyx had no idea how the cow, obviously transformed by someone, had disappeared. She's human, so she must have a soul, right? Interesting. With a curve of her lips, Nyx stretched out her hand and directly knocked on the door of the spirit realm above the sea. The next moment, the portal opened from the void, but this time, the other side of the door was the fifth layer of the spirit realm. Standing amidst the chaos of space-time, with the illusory stars as a backdrop, Lane put down what was in his hands and looked confusedly at the rare visitor who was stepping forward. Chapter 366 On the Banks of the Nile River. Within the fifth layer of the spirit realm, phantasmal stars twinkled faintly. Busy with such trivial matters again. Spending hundreds of years here, how much strength can you actually enhance? Taking steps into the spirit realm, the chaotic tendrils of space and time could not influence the graceful figure beneath the black dress. Nyx looked at the interface prototype fluctuating up and down before Lane, easily deducing his intent. However, Mother Night did not quite grasp such behavior. She could understand Erebus's actions. He was attempting to free himself from the shackles of the current world's laws to become a more liberated supreme being. But Lane had already achieved this point. To him, there were no longer any threats in this world. Even the world's laws themselves could not govern Lane, who resided within the spirit realm. If Nyx also possessed a spirit realm as fascinating as this, she would probably have shut herself in to play breeding games, instead of spending time and energy on further enhancing her strength. After all, she had no enemies, so what use was such great power? Little by little adds up, Nyx. Everything is accumulated step by step. Moreover, compared to what I wish to do, my current strength is actually far from enough. Shaking his head gently, Lane also understood the conceptual gap between them. After all, he was not a naturally immortal being, so in many ways, he was different from the gods of this world. There is so much unknown in the world, like how everything originally emerged from nothing, and what lies beyond the world. In the past, you could believe chaos was the only one in the world, but the existence of the 9 realms has already negated this point. Remember the Flesh Mother tree? As if recalling something, Lane spoke of the remnant from the world's destruction. With your power, you must have noticed its presence when it entered the world. The destruction of a world. I think it's enough for me to take as a warning. Perhaps, as long as it pleases you. Non-committal, Nyx obviously did not find much interest in this. If the world will eventually decay, then whatever you do now, the end result will be the same. Compared to Chaos himself, the present world is but one aspect of him. Even if you could develop the spirit realm to its peak, or even become another face opposite to the present world, what significance would it have? We'll see when the time comes. Shaking his head again, Lane had no desire for a needless argument. So, Nyx, what made you think of looking for me today? He thought she had come on a whim, perhaps out of boredom to pay a social visit, or to ask for some souls to take back and model. Before they parted last time, Lane had shared quite a bit of his experience in creating life, as well as souls with Nyx. The land of eternal night was probably livelier now, and there might be other changes in the future. However, what Nyx said next took Lane by surprise. A snow-white cow, transformed from a human, crossed mountains and seas, fell into the vortex where Prometheus resided, and then was sent back out by the merciful god of foresight. She finally reached the end of the sea and then disappeared before Nyx's eyes. Mother Night, with her supreme power, penetrated time and space to find some scenes of the unfortunate human traveling toward the edge by the East Sea. But everything before the disappearance was normal, and nothing seemed amiss until she vanished before Nyx's eyes. What was her name? His expression growing serious, Lane realized, perhaps as he had just mentioned, he truly did not understand the world as well as he thought. I roughly investigated the traces of her arrival. It seems her name is Io, and she has some connection with the new divine king on Mount Olympus. Calm in demeanor, although Nyx could not find any trace of where Io had gone after disappearing, the traces she left before disappearing were quite evident. If I can't find the answers here, I might just have to go to Olympus and have a look, hoping the new divine king doesn't answer me with, I don't know. His lips twitched slightly, but Lane quite agreed with this. I have a guess about this, but you can still go and confirm with Zeus. In fact, just a short while ago, something indeed seemed to have happened at his place. What Lane was referring to was the mysterious transfer of the Scepter of Wisdom. Once he finished the task at hand, he planned to personally go and see what had happened, but if Nyx was willing to do it for him, that was also fine. However, Mother Night was clearly not interested in this. Compared to a divine king, it was Io, who disappeared before her eyes, that concerned her more. Since Lane already had a notion, it naturally wasn't necessary to go to Olympus anymore. Let's hear your guess. Tilting her head, underneath the shifting veil, Nyx seemed somewhat excited. Well, if things go as expected. Hesitating for a moment, in the end, looking toward the edge of the great sea indicated by Nyx, Lane slowly said, the human princess who vanished without a trace is very likely on the banks of the Nile River. Perhaps the 9 realms were just an accident. It is there that might be food already captured by chaos long ago. Because of Lane's presence, Destiny's path had already been interfered with. The smaller the matter, the more likely it was to deviate from the original story. Before, he actually hadn't anticipated that the mortal Princess Io from mythology would still come into existence as scheduled, because compared to Zeus's later lovers, she neither bore any famous heroes nor was she the mother of a true god. As a mere mortal princess, her existence in itself shouldn't be so crucial in the threads of fate. Chapter 367. Theoretically, Io should have vanished with the disturbances of fate long ago. Maybe another human princess favored by Zeus would have emerged, or perhaps similar events would unfold, but the existence named Io should not appear again in the chaos world of this era. But the reality is that she still emerged, and even her fated path remains unchanged. If that's the case, what was supposed to be her original fate? To give birth to Epiphus, that offspring of Zeus and her. He shall rule over Egypt, becoming the sovereign of the Nile River banks. With an indescribable expression, Lane vaguely captured some mysteries behind this. He had assumed that this content would not reappear in the Chaos world since this world seemed to have no connection with Egypt, but now it seemed his understanding might be flawed. Myths do not arise without a cause. Perhaps in the original destiny, Io's existence actually symbolized Chaos's encroachment and assimilation of another world. Not a world attracted like the Nine Realms, but a collision that was destined to happen. But here comes the problem. The evolution of the Chaos world had accelerated significantly due to Lane's presence, and with civilization's birth changing with the eras, but as for another, if it exists, then all would be as per usual. But if it doesn't, then when the other world still develops along its original trajectory, and Io brings the so-called destined king of Egypt there, her fate likely won't be pleasant. Because according to Lane's guess, some conceptual collision between the two worlds had already occurred, and in the original mythological path, Io was supposed to be born thousands of years later. Perhaps by that time, the barriers between the two realms had already begun to overlap, and even Chaos had secured an absolute advantage. What the human princess would do is not conquering, but rather akin to sounding the victory horn. But now it's different. The contention between worlds may not have finished its course, and everything remains unknown. Yet the existence of destiny is so rigid that it still sent Io to the other side, forgetting that it was not an occupied territory, but an enemy state. So, are you able to pinpoint her whereabouts? Next to him, Nyx, unaware of Lane's line of thought, recalled the past and realized that the Nile River did not exist in her memories. The Chaos world left no place unknown to her. If she had no recollection, then the only possibility was that the so-called Nile River did not exist in this world. This resolved her confusion, as indeed powers of the world realm could evade her scrutiny. As for why Lane knew these secrets beyond the world, she found it natural. This ancient god, born with the world, has always been so unique. No one knows what truly happened before all creation or what he had truly done. I'm afraid I cannot yet. Shaking his head and noticing Nyx's somewhat displeased face, Lane slowly said, "The distance between us is too far, and we are likely separated by a barrier of worlds. But don't worry, there'll be a chance later on. When the monstrous beast repeats the attack on Olympus, and the gods scatter and flee, if everything is as I have conjectured, this is a part of Chaos's destined fate, a trajectory for devouring worlds that it has long established. Then, if we follow them when the time comes, we might find the place Io went to. But Nyx, even if you are not equivalent to your original self, can't you really see the trajectories of fate?" He was puzzled, as from the moment they had met, he had seldom felt that omniscience of fate from Nyx. In theory, with the triad governing destiny, Nyx's understanding of fate should surpass his own. After all, mythology is but a semblance of the truth told in later eras. How could it match directly viewing the script? That's for you to answer. At least in the first era, before I made contact with you, fate was not a mystery to me. It seemed like a complaint, but to Lane, the veiled lady of the night appeared quite cheerful. Only those who have possessed destiny begin to detest it. You wouldn't understand this feeling. Let's not talk of such boring matters. How long will it take in the future you've foreseen? Not much longer, at most. It won't exceed 1,000 years. By Nyx's side, listening to her meaningful sighs, Lane reaffirmed his choices even though he did not know what she had witnessed in her original destiny. Not to prophesy oneself, not to willingly confine oneself to the restraints of fate. Then whatever happens, everything is possible. Then let's wait. 1,000 years isn't long. Stretching languidly, Nyx glanced over the desolate fifth layer of the spirit realm. There was nothing of interest here. She decided to return to her own place. But before leaving, as if remembering something, she turned back curiously and asked, "Since you are now interested in that world, what do you plan to do? You won't simply be watching the play like me, will you?" "Of course not, and besides, Nyx, it's not your first day knowing me. What I plan to do is quite obvious, isn't it?" Calmly, though he had just learned this unexpected news, Lane had clearly made up his mind. One world, one far weaker than Chaos, a complete, independently existing world. Chapter 368. This gift from the endless void. If it can be consumed by them, why can't I? With a light leap, her mind fell into a haze. When Io regained her senses, she suddenly discovered that a whole new world had appeared before her. The land was covered in green, and in the distance lay vast rolling sands she had never seen before. A wide river rippled with waves, watering the land on both banks, bringing vitality to the great desert. The sky seemed to have become narrower, and if she had been a demigod with divinity, she might even have noticed that the laws that constructed everything were no longer the same. But this had nothing to do with Io. She couldn't see that much, and the changes in the world didn't have such a significant impact on her as a mortal. She simply realized all at once that the gadfly which had been relentlessly pursuing her was now gone, and even her own body was inch by inch returning to its original form. The hooves turned back into hands and feet, her dress covered her body, the power of the deities from the foreign realm dissipated, and Io had reverted to her former self. Ah, creator of bronze humanity, forethinker Prometheus, whether or not it was you who helped me, I am thankful for your blessing. Under the blue sky and white clouds, gone were the mooing sounds. The girl's clear voice had returned to her. She didn't know why she had come here, nor why she had transformed back, but she credited it all to Prometheus, the kind deity who was bound beneath the eye of the sea, enduring suffering. By chance, she had fallen into the sea's eye, where she met the deity of old. She told the forethinker about the brief history humans of her time understood, and in return Prometheus told her about the real world. Finally, the forethinker blessed Io, wishing her liberation, and sent her out from the sea's eye. Now, the princess was infinitely grateful to the ancient Titan deity. She had finally escaped the painful abyss. But her joy was fleeting, and as the excitement of finally regaining her freedom faded, and she looked upon this unfamiliar place, Io couldn't help but feel an onset of sadness. She had lost her father, her homeland, and was alone in this place. All that accompanied her were the moon, stars, and the bloodline of the brute within her womb. Loneliness and helplessness surged into Io's heart. She was all alone as far as the eye could see. O gods, whoever you may be, please answer me. How can I return to my homeland, to see my father again? Falling to the ground, Io prayed to all the deities she could think of, yet she received no answer. Thus the girl sat desolately on the riverbank, gazing hopelessly at the ceaseless flow of the river. The vast river brought both life and death. Just as water is the source of life, it can also bring cataclysmic disaster. For a moment, Io even entertained the thought that perhaps it wouldn't be so bad to end her life right there. Perhaps my birth was a mistake. This world contains only pain. Maybe death is the ultimate destination for everything. Standing by the riverbank, Io softly closed her eyes. But as push came to shove, she felt fear. No, you cannot die. Suddenly, she heard someone speak. Why not? If I can't decide my fate, can't I decide my own life? She exclaimed loudly, but then realized something. There was no one else here but her, who then had just spoken to her. Io turned around sharply, and at the edge of her vision, she saw the source of the voice. At the boundary between the yellow sand and the greenery, a girl seemed to embody all the beauty of the world, approaching her. The harsh sun did not wish to harm her and thus arranged for clouds to just block it in the sky. The branches of trees did not want to hinder her, parting to create a path with the help of the wind. The pure deity walked barefoot on the damp earth, and where she passed, flowers bloomed and fragrance wafted through the air spontaneously. Who are you? Are you a deity? Have you come to save me? She stood rooted to the spot, but soon a look of joy appeared on her face. Io looked at the girl, who was about the same age as herself, and asked expectantly, I swear, no matter which deity you are, if you can help me return to my homeland, I am willing to spend my life spreading the tale of your greatness. However, the figure in front of her just shook her head. I am Isis, the divine who governs life. I have saved many, but this time, I am not here to save you. The ethereal voice sounded again and, in a trance, The girl in the green dress crossed the vast distance. She looked at the princess out of this world, at first puzzled. But then, as if understanding dawned on her the next moment, looking at Io, Isis felt as though she were looking at herself, and also at her own future. The other was not supposed to arrive in her world at this time, so when she did, the destiny that was meant to be was disrupted. She initially carried the mission to replace Isis, but now all this had instead presented itself directly before the goddess of life. This mission was both bestowed by chaos and inescapable for Hemenu, because the former's power far exceeded the latter's by more than a step, making it an ending forcefully dictated under that power. Even now, Isis still found herself powerless against it. She could kill Io now, but it would all be meaningless. Thousands of years later, when the power of a foreign realm crushes Hemenu's resistance, what awaited her was still the fated demise. I should thank you, even though you were arranged to replace me. I should also hate you, because you have made me see more clearly my own helplessness. What are you talking about? Io was somewhat confused. She did not understand what this strange goddess meant. Replace whom? As a mortal, how could she possibly replace an immortal deity? Nothing much. Just that seeing you has clarified many things for me. With a serene smile, the whole world seemed to brighten and cheer. Isis slightly lifted her head, looking at the sky, looking at the earth. I was originally to marry my brother, but our future was a tragedy. I would bear the future king of Egypt. He is called Horus, is an eagle and also the storm. And you should have come at that time, replacing me with your child replacing mine. But now, you have come too early, and the fate of your world has taken a different direction. Gently shaking her head, and although she had grasped the situation, Isis became even more aware that the clash between the two worlds was not something she could partake in, and that her own world paled in comparison to that other one. The discovery of today might allow her to avoid her own tragedy. But that was all, and all this was predicated on her not trying to oppose what was destined. Can't defy fate, can we? Well then, since it is so, I don't wish to tread the same path. And as you carry the fate that was originally yours, let me now help you fulfill it. Tilting her head, Isis took a gemstone from the hem of her garment and placed it on Io's chest. The gemstone emitted a lush green light, and under its glow, every trace of Io that belonged to another world seemed to be concealed. Carry my kindness, carry my malice, carry my strength, and also carry my fate. Perhaps your offspring will still become the masters of Egypt, but probably not this generation. Smiling, she caressed Io's cheek. Yet it was as if Isis was speaking to herself. Remember to pray to the gods of your world. From your generation onward, let your descendants not forget. To change the fate of a world, or rather one more powerful than ours. If he can hear your prayers, perhaps everything might yet proceed towards a different ending. Chapter 369 Hebrew. On the banks of the Nile River, a dialogue that would change the fates of two worlds thus ended. The heaven and earth deities of Hemenu, the life symbolizing Isis, divided her authority and shared her fate with Io, also imposing one final constraint within her own power. No one was to speak of her, and the names of the deities from the foreign realm were to be perpetuated forever. Then she vanished into thin air, leaving only the princess from the other world all alone in this place. For a mortal to share the fate and authority of a deity was unimaginable. But as Io arrived bearing the fate of another world in place of Isis, things did not seem all that difficult. Power from the world naturally could yield before the world itself, especially when compared to chaos. The rules of this world were greatly different indeed. Unlike the deities from the previous two worlds, within this sand-enshrouded world, the gods were not immortal, they even aged with the passage of time, and divine power could only resist it to a certain extent, but not halt it entirely. Even their innate divine authority could be subsumed into one another through combat. The new gods overcoming the old ones, turning the old gods into one of their avatars, and then inheriting the predecessors' followers, titles, and authority, was so commonplace in Hemenu world. This reflected the small scale and chaotic rules of this world, but it also made many things seem natural. Just like now, since Io possessed Isis's divine power and fate, she would naturally be seen as part of Isis. Perhaps the world itself could sense this difference, but to the vast majority of native deities, they could hardly distinguish any differences. All they knew was that, after the pursuit by Osiris, the god of plants and abundance, the goddess of life finally agreed to marry her brother. Although Isis seemed to have changed her appearance, character, and even often spoke odd words, none of this was taken to heart by the gods. According to the current decision made by Ra, the sovereign of the gods of Hemenu, when Osiris and Isis were to marry, they would become the monarchs of the mortal realm, the de facto rulers of Upper and Lower Egypt. Therefore, the gods gathered in Heliopolis, the birthplace of mortal faith, to congratulate the union of this brother and sister. It seemed as if the domain of the Nile, which traversed worlds, was about to welcome new masters, and an era was poised to turn a new page. However, just as everything was proceeding as usual, within the pantheon, the god of sun, Ra, suddenly awoke from a profound dream. Drip, 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 drip. Ha!
No.
There was no sundial, for Ra was the sun amidst the ticking of flowing water. The god awoke from his slumber. On the highest throne, golden divine power inadvertently seeped out, gradually erasing the grand and magnificent temple inch by inch until everything returned to nothingness. In this ancient hall, only Ra's golden-cast body and the gemstone-studded divine seat beneath him remained. At the same time, the sun began to tremble without warning, affecting both heaven and earth. Before Ra's unrestrained power, mortals knelt on the ground and prayed, while other deities looked anxiously in the direction of the pantheon. The chaos serpent had just been slain once more, yet it had not been able to resurrect again. What exactly caused such a supreme deity to lose his composure? Phew! So it was just a dream. Opening his eyes, Ra took a deep breath on the throne. His heaving chest gradually calmed, and his intensely fluctuating emotions also settled down. As the supreme sovereign of a deity race, the ultimate ruler of Hemenu world, there was nothing in this world that should have disparaged him so. The world of Hemenu was nothing like the 9 realms and chaos. There were no primordial gods born with the world here, nor were there titans or wraiths to rival the Aesir tribe. Even the world's own facets only flashed by during creation, leaving no further imprint in the world. In this realm, Adam, who had defeated the former god of sun, Adam, making him an incarnation of himself, was the sole supreme being. Even the eternal world-ending chaos serpent, Apep, could only be repeatedly slain by him. But at this moment, when he reopened his crimson golden eyes, what filled them, aside from majesty, were puzzlement and a concealed unease lurking within his subconscious. Such a strange dream. Is this some revelation from Hemenu to me? Remaining still on the throne for a little while, after a short time, Ra waved his hand. In silence, a transformation occurred. The external sun returned to normal, and the power that had inadvertently spilled out was retracted by him. At the same time, like the rewinding of time, the shattered temple restored itself inch by inch. Or more accurately put, it was a kind of rebirth. After dealing with these trifles, sitting on the lofty divine seat, Ra couldn't help but recall his previous dream. However, what puzzled him was that the dream, which had made him wary and fearful, was now a blank. He simply could not remember what he had dreamt at all. The only remnants in his mind were warnings, seemingly telling him that something terrifying was approaching, and its harbinger had already arrived. A joke! What in this world could possibly oppose me? Chapter 370. Even the world itself must submit to my power. Rising from his throne, supreme power surged around him. Ra's golden eyes emitted a glow, bringing everything in the world into his view. Mortals kneeling on the ground, gods celebrating a marriage, plants and animals, and even the serpent, slowly reborn amidst the tumbling chaos on the flip side of the world. Everything was under his control. There were no exceptions. Having defeated the previous sun, he naturally wouldn't give successors a chance. And now, in this world, there was no existence that could stand against him. He was the sole master of all worlds. His gaze swept across the land, and Ra was quite pleased with the human realm that belonged to him. Even though his power had reached such heights, this world seemed a bit too small for him, but that was a regrettable limitation. However, at that moment during his inspection, Ra's gaze suddenly paused. In Heliopolis, he saw the celebrating gods. He saw their jubilation at the forthcoming wedding feast. This was a matter Ra himself had arranged, so it didn't surprise him. What made Ra pause were Isis, the daughter of sky and earth gods, one of the few powerful deities in this world. Even though her appearance seemed to have changed, that wasn't what caught Ra's attention. What truly drew him was another life force within her. She was with child, and although Isis's divine power had fooled the other deities present, it couldn't escape Ra's scrutiny. He keenly sensed that the unborn infant possessed something quite unusual. That was a distinctly different bloodline presence. Self-conceived. As the goddess of life, that might make sense. Narrowing his eyes, Ra didn't think the matter was that simple, but for the moment, he couldn't pinpoint the cause of the issue. As for why he hadn't noticed Isis's irregularity, that was understandable. Isis had long existed, so she was able to share her fate and power with the princess of a foreign realm. However, Horus, the son that the goddess of life should have borne, did not yet exist. Therefore, although the child within Io had successfully usurped a part of Horus's fate, it had inherited none of his power. Without power, the bloodline presence that didn't fit with the world naturally exposed itself before Ra. Dreams, omens, and this newborn. His deep voice echoed in the empty hall. Ra's face remained expressionless. He was arrogant but not foolish, just as he had never really needed the aid of other gods in his battle against the Chaos Serpent Apep. That serpent was another manifestation of the weakness of the Hemenu world. Its order was unstable, chaos had not been suppressed, and unlike the quiet abyss Tartaros of chaos, the chaotic forces in this world materialized as the Serpent Apep, also known as Apophis. It lacked intelligence, with its sole instinct being the destruction of the world, and it was immortal and indestructible. No matter how many times it was destroyed, it would always be reborn after a period. Therefore, to maintain the stability of his dominion over the world, Ra had to delve underground every so often, into the chaotic aspect of the world, to kill and disperse this undying serpent so it couldn't threaten the mortal realm. And in all the previous encounters, the reason he allowed those so-called mighty deities to accompany him was also calculated. Having the gods witness his strength as well as the might of Apep would help them understand the indispensability of Ra and the insignificance of the gods. At the same time, he could gauge the strength of the other gods in battle, not giving them a chance to surpass him. The gods of Hemenu aged, even though Ra had already touched upon a higher boundary. He grasped the essence of the sun's rebirth, renewal, and could avoid aging in other ways, but that wasn't a reason for him to be careless. So, whether the newborn had issues or not, he had to ensure it would be a non-issue. So now it was time for him to make a choice. Kill him or consume him? No, that's pointless. He's still too weak. I can't even see the potential for him to grow strong. Two mighty pillar gods giving birth to an entity without authority. That is indeed laughable, but perhaps that's what makes him special. Still expressionless, Ra did not wish to resort to such a simplistic manner of eradicating this menace, because although Hemenu's gods could devour each other, there was also a trait. Devouring a weaker being would only diminish one's own power. It was better to maintain one or two of the most powerful godhoods rather than assimilate all into one. Therefore, in the current world, there were virtually no deities left worth Ra's consumption because, in this world, apart from the primordial water symbolizing the origin of all things, the sun was the supreme and only. Moreover, Ra highly doubted that if this unborn child truly symbolized a threat, consuming him might not avert the disaster. He needed another solution, one more appropriate. Perhaps I can consider the issue from another perspective. He can die, but this threat, it still needs a successor. I need a visible threat, not one that's hidden. And his uniqueness, it comes from his bloodline.